Hey, fight fans, welcome back to Carlo Prusa MMA. I am your host, Carlo Prusa, and today I'm with the Nomad. He's coming off of a big Cage Warriors victory, took on Leandro Camargo, big first round victory with those vicious knees. He is Mr. Damon Wilson. Damon, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
Hey, what's up, Carlo? Appreciate you having me on again. It's good to be here.
Absolutely, man. How could I not after the performance you put on just a few nights ago? I've watched a bunch of your fights. That one, I think, has to be up there for some of the most impressive striking and, finishing off those knees. Walk me through that closing sequence of that bout.
Yeah, man. I felt pretty sharp in there. Stuck to the game plan. We knew he was a good grappler. I knew he was going to have a lot of good energy and strength early, and kind of figured that if I could stay on my game plan, keep it striking as much as possible, stuff takedowns, he'd start fading and I'd start being able to unleash some violence. And that's kind of exactly how it played out.
Absolutely. Was able to go over other side of the world, get to go to England for that contest, going over to the UK. What was that whole experience like traveling, and fighting in a totally different country?
Yeah, it was interesting. I wanted to do it for a while now. I fought back in London 2 years ago, came out on the wrong end. And ever since then, I was like, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna right the wrong. A lot of people blamed my last loss on the travel and stuff like that, and for me, man, I had no excuses. I think that a lot of that is mental. I think obviously the travel sucks, but I get there a couple days in advance so I can adjust to the time schedule. And, I had been asking to get on this card for quite some time and was able to make it happen. But yeah, I mean, the like I said, the travel sucks, but it was nice not having to cut as much weight. That helped me out a lot. But, I think it was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. I needed to get a win in this first quarter of the year.
You're really on a roll right now, looking more impressive in each of your last three contests. Seen a lot of finishes from you lately. Obviously, you're a 9-2 guy right now. I feel like you're on the kind of on the cusp of going to that major show. I think you're really close to taking that jump. Going in there, getting a finish. Is that something you're really thinking at this point in your career?
Yeah, I gotta finish, guys. That's what the UFC is looking for. I'm trying to get on Contender Series, and I've been told several times that they're not just looking for guys that are winning; they're looking for guys that are finishing people and being active. So, that was another reason why I was trying to turn around and fight fairly quickly, because back in December I was able to stay healthy. So I wanted to get back in there and get another finish. And man, it's hard to do. We're fighting professional fighters out there that train for a living. And it is, it's difficult to knock out a random Joe in the streets, let alone a professional fighter in the octagon. So it's a difficult task, but I believe in my skill set and I believe in the power. I've proved to myself time and time again that I have the finishing capability and I have power in my strikes, whether it be the hands or the knees. So yeah, going into the fight, man, it was finish this guy or else I lose. Like that's my mentality.
You think that could have been your last fight on the regional scene?
I'm hoping so, man. I hope so. I like you said, 9-2 with 6 finishes now. I mean, if you would have told me 4 years ago when I started, making this run, I would have been like, yeah, that's gonna do it. That's gonna get me on the Contender Series at least. And I think that's really the only pathway to the UFC at this point. It seems like I think 70% of their roster comes from that show. So yeah, I think the way that I'm finishing people is really the key. And I'm not just fighting cans out there either. I'm fighting guys with experience. Traveling overseas, fighting a Brazilian in England. I'm doing what I got to do, and I think the way that I'm finishing these guys, I mean, the shots of those knees landing with no crowd being there. I wish the crowd would have been there, but with no crowd, man, you can really hear those knees land, and it made me sick to my stomach after rewatching it.
You know, you mentioned a good point. You're not going out there, you're not fighting cans, you're fighting really tough guys. And, something I think we're noticing in mixed martial arts that we've seen a lot of boxing back in the day is, you have these different regional scenes, these regional promoters who pick their golden boys and they feed them. And, they make these guys up 10-0, 12-0 guys. Well, they go to the big shows and they're losing in their first couple fights just because they've never fought anyone even close in competition. And when they hit that next level, it's like you hit a wall. What is going on? How do you think that has impacted mixed martial arts?
Yeah, no, it happens all the time, man. I see it all the time. Guys that are patent records, and they get exposed pretty quick when they get to the UFC because everyone on the UFC roster these days is a solid dude. So you come in as a debut guy and you haven't fought the competition, you will get exposed very quickly. And I think that the UFC is catching on to it as well. I think that they're being more particular about who they pick to get onto the contender series even. And yeah, I think to be able to get on there, you have to be in an organization that's credible and fighting guys that, at least have winning records. Everyone that I've fought has had a winning record, and typically has had more fight experience than me. And I think that's definitely something that the UFC brass is looking for.
It's kind of crazy when you think about it. 10 to 15 years ago, mixed martial arts was not as culturally accepted. 15 to 20 years ago was the wild, wild west. People calling it human cockfighting. People thought people who were doing this should be in prison, all this crazy stuff. You've been doing this for quite a while right now. When you first started getting into it, did you ever envision mixed martial arts to blow up to what it is right now?
I didn't. I never really thought about it, I guess, back then. I enjoyed watching it, and I wanted to do it. I guess, if you're getting into this for popularity reasons, that's probably the wrong reasons because it is getting popular, but at the end of the day, man, a lot of people still don't really understand this sport and they don't really understand what fighters go through and what we do. So if you're looking to get in it for those reasons, it's probably not the best sport for you. But man, I think it's incredible the viewership that MMA has right now, and I think it's going to continue to evolve and continue to become one of the fastest growing sports and be one of the most worldwide recognized sports that there is. And it's only going to be beneficial to guys like me. The more eyes, the more money, the more traction. It's all good. It's all good stuff. So yeah, let's keep it up. Let's keep making this sport as good as any sport in the world. And I think guys like you are a big part of that as well, spreading the word. So yeah, we're all in it.
When you first started, maybe in the early days, the amateur contests, do you have any stories of maybe fighting, bars, barns, mystery opponents? Do you have anything crazy?
As far as my MMA career, not too much because I got into good shows fairly early, but I guess you could say I was in a few street fights back in the day. Yeah, I mean my first fight in the streets, I think it was like going into my senior year, and some guys were talking shit on one of my best friends, and I called them up and said, hey, if you want to do this, let's do it. So I'm from the country, so we typically go and find a back road in a cornfield, and that's what happened. We were out on a dirt road, and you see truck lights coming up and hooping and hollering, and you got 5 or 6 F-150s coming down the road blaring music and drinking whiskey, and it's on. And then I look at my crew's starting to tie their shoelaces. So yeah, we got it on, and I won that fight, believe it or not, by rear naked choke. It's kind of funny. I strike these days, but back then I didn't have any experience. I was just a wrestler, and I ended up choking the kid out. And my brother was the kid I was fighting had a brother, and he sucker punched me while I had the kid's back and was choking him. My brother came in and punched him, And at the time, my brother was in a sling. He just had surgery. He won a state title, and he punched him with his state championship wrestling ring. And the kid had an imprint of his ring on his head the next day. So, but we were all good friends, small town, so we were all good the next day. But stuff like that from where I'm from is it's you want to get down, you go to a cornfield and you get down.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit earlier of how people really don't understand what fighters go through. And I mean, it is incredible the sacrifices that you guys have to do every single day. I think one of the reasons for it is this whole entertainment personality driven era of combat sports that we're in. I mean, fans know fighters. Like, let's look at the UFC. Who's the big fan favorites? You got Sean O'Malley, you got Conor McGregor, both those guys, very talented individuals. But what else do? They're showmen. They know how to sell a fight. They talk their mouth to the absolute fullest. And, I think fans in this day and age are expecting that. Maybe your fighting just isn't enough for most guys, but you also need to put in a character. How do you feel like entertainment and personality has affected combat sports?
Yeah. I think you need, it's a good thing. You need it. You need characters. If you're going to blow this sport up, you need characters. I think about wrestling and how wrestling struggled for a long time becoming popular. And I think of a lot of it was because we were all boring, man. We were all boring, hard-nosed guys that do the right thing and say the right thing at all times. And I think that, you need some diversity. You need some guys that are, saying some outlandish stuff that gain traction. And like I said, you just need characters. You mentioned a guy like Sean O'Malley. I mean, that dude looks like he's straight out of Fortnite. And people want to see that. It's fun. It makes things fun. I do my best to draw a little attention in different ways. Obviously you don't want to act like an idiot out there. I still got to represent my last name, and my old man wouldn't be too happy if I was saying some of the stuff that comes out of McGregor's mouth. But yeah, I think that it's good for the sport. It's good to have different personalities. That's what makes this what it is. It's different than any other sport, is you get to actually learn the personality of an individual. You get to see their face constantly, and when we talk about football or baseball and stuff like that, they wear helmets and you can't even see their face. You don't know you don't know the sound of their voice and that kind of thing. So I think for fighting, it's extremely important to have personas and personalities in there. So it only helps it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big byproducts of this whole entertainment and personality driven era of mixed martial arts is a term we use called the casual fan. So these are the guys, they're usually at B-dubs. They like to get drunk. They like to yell, twist them, and what. They have all these crazy takes. They feel like they could be professional fighters. Overall, what do you think of this group of fans?
Yeah. Let's just say that I probably avoided watching fights with that group of fans. I'll say that, as I was growing up watching fights and in college and stuff, I typically would find a place to watch fights on my own, just because I would end up being the one scrapping by the end of the night if I was around casual fans like that. But with that being said, man, like, we want fans. We want fans. We want guys that are paying to watch us fight, regardless of what they're saying. There's always going to be, keyboard warriors out there that think they can do it better than you, that'll never have the guts to step in a cage. I'm still a firm believer that every man should have an amateur fight under his belt. I think it should be a requirement by law, to be honest with you. But yeah, there's some guys that need some ass whoopings out there. But I do think that you need the casuals. Of course, you need the casuals.
Last time we talked a little bit, we talked how these casual fans, they look at the John Joneses, the Sean O'Malley's, and the Alex Pereiras, and they're like, wow, being a fighter is the greatest life ever. Little do they know, man, battling on the regional scene, you're losing money. Guys have that 9-to-5 job. Throw a kid in there, throw a wife in there, pay to train, miss birthdays, holidays, Thanksgivings, don't see family members for a very, very long time, just for the opportunity to chase this. And even if you make it the big show, that does not even unlock financial freedom. But so many guys, it's addicted. It's a drug. They can't get past it. You've experienced the highs. You've experienced the lows. Big, big win for you on last Friday. You're getting really, really close to going to that next level. During those moments, are you able to look back and reflect on the journey and really be like, this is worth it and I just got to keep going?
Yeah, there's times where you have to remind yourself of where you came from. You have to remind yourself of when you didn't have a dime to your name. And like you said, all the sacrifices that you've put your family through. My wife has sacrificed a lot, constantly, helping out financially. We've got two babies at home under 2 years old, and I leave for training camps and stuff. So it's difficult on the family, and you got to remind yourself of how far you've come. But the job's not done. So it's a constant balancing act. It's a back and forth of, staying present, understanding that you still have work to do, but also giving yourself a pat on the back occasionally, knowing that how far you've come and what you've done to get here. So yeah, it's a combination of all of it, and I think that's just the mental fortitude that the MMA instills in you.
For you, what does it mean to call yourself a martial artist?
Man, it's a good question. I think it's more of a lifestyle than anything. I think that that's one thing that people don't understand is you think of the punches and kicks, but it's more of a lifestyle. I dedicate a lot of time to this, and we're talking about diet. We're talking about out of camp training. Where you don't have a fight on the horizon. You don't know who your opponent's going to be, when it's going to be, but you're training. You're training because you're trying to become a better person, a better human being, better fighter. I have a tattoo on my leg. It says Arete. It's an ancient Greek saying Arete, where they would use it primarily for like Olympic athletes and stuff, but it's achieving one's full potential, and it's a task that is unattainable. You're constantly trying to achieve one's full potential. So I think I have that tattoo just to remind me that I don't know. I guess I'm not good enough, and I never will be. So but yeah, that's what martial arts is to me. Always striving for your full potential.
For you, what would it mean to get the opportunity to fight in the UFC?
It's everything, man. I've dreamed about it for a long time, and I've even come to terms with it. If I don't make it, I've already come to terms with that, and just it's all right. It'll be all right either way. But I do believe that I'm well on my way. I do believe that I'll step in that cage and I'll wear those three-letter gloves on, or three letters on my gloves, and it's gonna be an incredible moment for myself and my family, and for every fan of MMA watching, because I only know one way. I only know one way, and that's forward, and that's dangerous and violence. So yeah, it's gonna be good.
I still think in this day and age, even how big and popular mixed martial arts is, I still think some fighters get a bad rap by some people, so people don't understand it. And I think one part they don't understand, yes, you guys, you go out there, you fight another guy, you're training, you're doing all that. But to me, fighting is more than what just goes on in the cage. In life, so how many people do we see do the static 9 to 5 job every single day? They get complacent. They can't chase their dreams because they're letting these obstacles get in their way. But people don't realize fighters, they're battling against that. And
Yeah.
I think that's where the disconnect comes from guys who are in the sport to the rest of society. They're kind of on the out looking in. For you, you have 2 daughters, you have 2 kids at home that are both young. You're showing to them that you don't need to be part of this 9 to 5 job. You can do what you want, live your dream, chase it, work hard, and get there. What do you want them to take away from your journey in combat sports?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Yeah, because I think that money's not everything. I mean, obviously, it's good to be financially stable, and man, it's stressful as hell when you're not. But and I don't know if I've ever said this, but and this is kind of funny, but before I started fighting professionally, I was making 6 figures in my job, and I quit that job to make 4 figures, and that's not a joke. That's true. So it's absolutely insane. I look back and think that I was probably a dumbass for making that choice, but I stayed true to myself, and I'm betting on myself all the way through, and I'm gonna see it through. I got the rest of my life to work, and so I got a college degree, I can get a job, and that's not an issue. So I think doing what you love, doing something that means something is you know, a purpose in a sense, and gives other people inspiration. I think that's yeah, I think it means a lot. And to show my kids that, I was just talking to my wife tonight. We were having a drink. We were lucky enough to have my in-laws watch the kids for the night, and we were having a drink. And I said something about that, about how my kid, he's not going to be bragging to his friends about me making six figures. He's going to be bragging to his friends about me fighting people, and like I was like, my dad was a carpenter, and like I bragged to my friends about him building houses. I didn't brag to him about the money he made. So like, kids don't know about money and how much money you make, man. They know what you do, so and I think what I do is pretty cool. So yeah.
You train over at Alliance Mixed Martial Arts over in California with a bunch of killers, some of the best to do it. How did the journey lead there?
Man, that was just my choice to go there. I'm from the Midwest. I'd never been out in California. I always looked up to Dominic Cruz and Jeremy Stevens, and I thought that their styles would mesh well with mine. And when I made the decision that I was going to commit to professional fighting full time, I said, let's go check out Alliance. So I drove across the country, took my camper, and drove across the country to California, and I planted down, and I started sparring the next day with him. I sparred Alliance the next day, and that was it, man. From that moment on, that was where I wanted to be, and it's worked out really well. I was lucky enough to be in Cruz's training camp for his retirement fight. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for him, and he got hurt. But I was down in Mexico training with him, and that was a blessing. And then lucky enough to have Jeremy Stevens in my corner my last several fights, constantly picking that guy's brain. And now he's back in the UFC, back in going to Iowa to whoop some ass. So can't wait to see what he does. These guys are legends of the sport, and I'm absolutely honored to be able to call them teammates and friends.
When I look at you, I see some comparison from former UFC guys. There's two that jump out. One, Jeremy Stevens. I think you have that same attitude, that same mentality. And then two, I mean, that's the easy one, Donald Cowboy Cerrone.
Okay.
You get any takeaways from those two?
Yeah, of course, man. No, Jeremy's my guy. Like that's who I want to fight. Like, and when you say Cowboy Cerrone, of course, I mean that's a guy that had two guys that have had maybe the most amount of fights in the UFC. Always game, always down to fight, and always a threat. Can knock out any human being on the planet, and that is definitely a good weapon to have in your back pocket. So those are wonderful compliments.
Before we wrap up here, I want to get your takes on some big contests that are coming up. So the first one I want to talk about, Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett. Who do we got winning this contest?
Man, with Paddy being a Cage Warriors guy, I do think that's a bad matchup for Chandler. I'm typically American all the way, but man, I think that Paddy is a bad matchup for him. I think that his length, his athleticism is good enough to keep Chandler at bay on the feet. And then if it hits the mat, I think that Paddy's grappling is unique and diverse, and he's liable to strangle Chandler.
One that's coming up really, really soon, Sean Brady and Leon Edwards.
Yeah. We just saw Leon lose to Bilal. Sean Brady has a very similar style, a heavy grappling wrestling style with good pace and pressure and cardio. So you want to say, man, if Leon hasn't, corrected himself mentally and physically in there, then he might come out on the wrong end. But with it being in London, I think the hometown crowd is going to be on Leon's side, and I think that he's going to be able to keep his distance, stay away from too many grappling exchanges, and take a decision now.
Speaking of Bilal Muhammad, he's got one coming up against Jack Della. What do you got on that one?
Man, Bilal always surprises me. And I think it's because he's able to mix it up so well and his cardio holds up really well. He puts guys in fights that they don't want to be in. He's definitely going to have to do that against Jack. Jack's got really slick boxing. But I think that Bilal is going to be able to implement his wrestling and grappling strategy similar to how Burns was able to do against JDM. And then JDM caught him in the third round and finished him. But I think that Bilal is going to stay safe and be able to grind him out to a decision.
Volkanovski or Diego Lopez?
Ooh. I think you probably got to go Volkanovski. I know he's getting up there in age and he's coming off some losses, but I think stylistically, he's very good at staying out of danger on his feet. And Lopez, if you're able to just stay out of the pocket, kind of pop shot him on the outside, I think you can wear on him and win there. So I think Volkanovski with good footwork and lateral movement and volume striking.
All right, last one here is Sean O'Malley or Merab Dvalishvili.
Man, I honestly don't think it goes too much differently than the first time. I know O'Malley was hurt. I think he had a hip injury, but I think Merab is just a very tough style to deal with. Once again, the wrestling pace and pressure, it seems like that's kind of a common thread of champs right now. And Merab's as good as they come when it comes to that stuff. I think that O'Malley always has a shot to catch you coming in, but we'll go Merab again to just kind of maul him with the wrestling.
Absolutely. Right now you're on the cusp of probably going to that big show. We're talking about the big names that are on the marquee here. When you're looking at guys like that, guys in the 145, 155 division, are you looking at them as potential opponents right now?
I'm always looking at like the upcoming cards and what featherweights are on it, just in case somebody drops out. I'll hop in on a short notice any day of the week. But as far as like, lining up on Contender Series or something, I honestly wouldn't know, just because it would probably be somebody from a regional circuit that I'm not familiar with. But yeah, short notice UFC fights, I'm always eyeballing cards that are coming up and seeing what's going on.
Awesome. All right, last question for you, Damon. We're only in March here, halfway through March. We still got 9.5 months left of 2025. In a perfect world, how does this rest of the year play out for you?
Man, perfect world. Go in there in August and get on Contender Series and knock somebody out, and then be in the UFC by the end of the year. Maybe like November. Fight in the UFC debut in November and come out on top and go into 2026 as a UFC fighter with a win under his belt. That would be ideal.
Awesome, man. Well, David, hey, thank you so much for taking the time out of your night to talk to me. I really appreciate it. Awesome talking to you again. Awesome seeing that victory on Friday. And I hope to see you in the Contender Series maybe this summer.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Carl. I appreciate it. Always appreciate the time. God bless you.
Absolutely, man. That's it for us tonight. I'm Carl Prusa. He is the Nomad. He is Mr. David Wilson. Follow his career because he's making a big statement soon. Take care, fight fans.